From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, I'm Carla Gonzalez, and this is From the South. Nicaraguan Foreign Minister Denise Moncada has announced a temporary stop to the operations of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights in the country. He denounced interference attempts and lack of respect for sovereignty. Other two groups, backed by the Organization of American States, are also temporarily ceasing operations.
This temporary suspension of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights, MECENI, and the interdisciplinary group of independent experts will last until the conditions are restored to respect our sovereignty and end interference in Nicaragua's internal matters.
We deeply regret the decision by the government. Surely in Washington they will regret receiving this information. We deeply regret not being able to meet the foreign minister and to go get feedback on our work, which would have helped both sides better understand each other's positions.
The government of Ecuador has rejected an audio recording that was leaked this week, which suggested President Lenin Moreno was unwilling to negotiate with the rebel group that earlier this year kidnapped and killed 3 Ecuadorian journalists. In the audio, President Lenin Moreno can be heard saying that the integrity of the state is more important than the lives of a few people. Kidnappers have proposed to free the reporters in exchange for the release of 3 prisoners from their organization. The government says his words were taken out of context and that to reproduce the leaked audio constitutes a crime. Ecuador's workers' unions have rejected the new economic measures that were announced by the government of Moreno on Tuesday. The announcements include another hike in gasoline prices and the elimination of 25,000 public jobs. Some critics, including Ecuador's Citizens' Revolution movement, have said this represents a neoliberal shift in the country's policies.
We oppose to the price increases to gas. We condemn the statements of the Minister of Finance when he says that basic necessity products are not transported in vehicles which use gasolina extra, and says that their price will not rise. Speculation will be generated and will in turn increase the cost of products of basic necessity in our country.
Right now, Ecuadorians are living a political crisis, an economic crisis, and the social crisis that comes as a consequence. This crisis is not being provoked by workers nor the Ecuadorian people, the least protected people. This crisis is being provoked by large business-owning groups in partnerships with sections of the government. They think that once again, it is us who are responsible for creating this crisis. At no point are us workers responsible for causing this economic crisis.
Ecuador's National Assembly has approved several reforms to the communication law passed 5 years ago by the government of Rafael Correa. Our correspondent in Quito, Denise Herrera, has the details.
After 6 hours of debate and with the intervention of more than 30 Assembly members, the reform bill of the communication law has been approved with 75 votes in favor. The bill modifies 76% of the law that has been in place since 2013, when it was first passed by the National Assembly.
64 articles have been modified and 41 have remained in the form they were in the original communication law. The benefits of this new communication law are the following. We eliminated deontological norms in order to be aligned with the principles of the right to freedom of expression. We prohibited prior censorship by authorities and public officials, and they can no longer decide whether content should be disseminated or not. It will also eliminate the defamation of people, as this violates individual and collective rights to receive quality information. We've also included an article that will guarantee state protection for communication workers.
One of the points under discussion was self-regulation in the media. The Citizen Revolution movement warned that this puts the press at risk.
What is happening with these reforms is that it goes straight to a judicialization of the communication, because all types of administrative measures are removed within the reforms of the law of the communication. This implies that there will be no conciliation measures for citizens that can be established in the event that rights are violated, and citizens will have to go directly to the judicialization of the communication, putting in defense the rights not only of the citizenship, but also of the journalists and workers of the communication as well as the media.
The debate was joined by different sectors of the communication industry, such as the community media, which expressed their total rejection of new competition for radio and television frequencies.
This is an unconstitutional process. Also, the distribution of media outlets that before were 34% for community, 33% for private, and 33% for public has also been modified. The 33% for public media has been eliminated and has been added to the private media. This has been a process that we have been denouncing for some time now.
Among the most important modifications is the elimination of the Superintendency of Information and Communication Supercom. The Council for Regulation, Development and Promotion of Information and Communication Cordicom will be responsible for monitoring and controlling competition, but will not able to impose financial sanctions. The organization will instead make technical reports when finding discriminatory, violent, or sexually explicit information. Denise Herrera, Telesur, Ecuador.
Brazilian President Michel Temer has been charged for alleged corruption and money laundering by the country's general prosecutor. An investigation against Temer revealed he had taken bribes by companies in exchange for the extension of 2 government port contracts. Among these was Rodrimar, a shipping and logistics company which is believed to have paid bribes to Temer, amounting to almost $8 million. Temer can only be tried while president if Brazil's lower house of Congress votes to allow a trial to proceed, which is unlikely to happen before he leaves office on January 1st. Former Brazilian President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva will remain in prison. The President of the Supreme Court, Minister Dias Toffoli, has annulled a decision to release detainees convicted in a second legal stance. Lula and other people who are incarcerated but have not yet exhausted their appeals will remain behind bars. Earlier, a Supreme Court judge ruled that all prisoners awaiting a judgment on their second appeal should be freed. Lula's attorneys had called for his immediate release. The former president has been jailed since April 2018. Mexican authorities are investigating the death of 2 Honduran teenagers who were stabbed over the weekend. The victims were reportedly between 16 and 17 years old and were part of the migrant caravan. Their injuries were consistent with a knife attack and strangulation. According to an initial investigation, the victims and the assailants had spoken about trading money for sex. The Honduran ambassador confirmed the pair had joined the caravan back in October. The Mexican government has announced a new migration project which will focus on respecting human rights and social development. It will work in accordance with the recently adopted United Nations Migration Pact.
As a project based on respect to human rights, non-criminalization of migrants, and the development of southern Mexico and Central America, a 6-year program for migration was presented by the new government of Mexico.
The nature itself of migration as a phenomenon is forcing us to take a wider approach to migration policy. This is not a thing that comes from a single area. It's a state initiative.
The plan, according to the Foreign Affairs Secretary, represents an effort to look after all migrants, even Mexicans.
Internal migration is included because this type of migration is sometimes forgotten. So we are not necessarily speaking of migration between countries.
The announcement from the Mexican government coincides with the one by the United Nations, where representatives from 152 countries signed an agreement for safe, regular, and organized migration.
Today we are announcing our migration policy, which is unrestrictedly attached to the Marrakech Agreement.
A day before, the Mexican Foreign Ministry announced a plan with the United States to promote investment in Central America and the south of Mexico.
To really solve the forced migration issue that many countries have, we have to face poverty and violence that cause this migration.
An important part of the 6-year program is the extension of visitor work visas to citizens from Honduras and El Salvador, so they can look for jobs in Mexico.
Mexico and the U.S. have signed a joint plan to improve the living conditions of Central American migrants. Our correspondent Pablo Perez has more on this agreement.
Today, the Mexican foreign minister announced a binational plan with the United States in which Mexico has committed to invest $35 billion for the coming years in Mexico, Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. These are the countries with the largest migrant flows. The intention is to support the economic development of the region to better the living conditions of the citizens of these countries. This in order to stop the massive migrant flow. This means that Mexico will invest $35 billion, while the U.S. will invest $5.8 billion in Central America. This is one of the primary actions the United States is taking to fight immigration and goes against the attacks and statements repeated by the U.S. president.
Pablo Perez from Mexico. We have more stories coming up. We'll be back.
With developing events being presented through analysis. Our coverage transcends borders. With renowned journalist Walter Martinez.
Salud amigos, tripulantes de nuestra querida, contaminada y única nave espacial.
Dossier. Weekdays. Only on Telesur.
Y ponga usted las cámaras, señor director.
Welcome back. Argentina's Congress has turned into a law a project that seeks to teach public officials about gender issues. It's known as the Micaela Law, taking the name of a child who was murdered due to gender-based violence last year.
During a week that was marked by various accusations of sexual abuse in work, family, and military situations, lawmakers gave in to social pressure and turned into law a proposal that asks that all state workers must take yearly classes about gender violence, no matter their rank.
This has been a week marked by countless testimonies of sexual abuse. We have heard from a lot of adults who were abused in their childhood, and I think this starts a paradigm shift in all the government's power, so we must keep up.
The so-called Micaela Law proposes the creation of a permanent national program of institutional training on gender and violence against women, with the goal of informing all public officials about how to recognize and deal with gender violence.
We don't need any more laws. We need to provide proper training to learn and understand a new language and how to properly treat such a sensible subject, compromising to take this work seriously.
In light of multiple complaints of sexual abuse, judges, prosecutors, and judicial workers met to discuss about practices and processes that guarantee justice with gender perspective. They also talked about several complaints of sexual abuse.
We have to be willing to receive training in gender perspectives. We have to start an investigation, because if you don't do the research, you may lose testimonies, and above all, you lose the victim's trust.
Feminist organizations have once again raised their voice to encourage women to report any abuse they have suffered. Also, they demand that convictions be given out as an example and ask for integral protection to prevent, sanction, and eradicate violence against women.
Milagros Sala, the Argentine indigenous leader, is in the middle of her fourth trial. Our correspondent in Buenos Aires, Sabrina Roth, brings us more.
The hearings continue in the fourth trial against Argentinian indigenous leader Milagros Sala in the case known as the 2007 Azopardo shooting. The prosecutor has recommended a 12-year jail sentence for Sala. She's accused of being the co-conspirator in the murder of neighborhood leader Alberto Cardozo. The main witness, Jorge Rafael Paz, is believed to have lied to the court on numerous occasions, and his is the only testimony against her. He claimed that in a meeting the day before, Milagro Sala ordered Cardoza to be killed. But everybody else giving testimony, even those who he said took part in the meeting, denied that meeting ever took place. The hearings continue next week, and the following week the final sentence is expected to be delivered.
Sabrina Roth from Argentina. Now we go to Paraguay. The government has called for talks with indigenous communities and farming organizations who say they are being displaced from their lands to make way for soy monoculture farming. The government called on these organizations to sit down and talk in order to find a solution to the issue. Authorities say they want to find ways to help those most vulnerable. Ongoing protests by the Tacuaray community in the department of Canindeyú are demanding the return of their lands and justice for murdered indigenous leader Isidro Barrios.
According to the resolution of the Rural Welfare Institute dating back in 1981, 1,000 hectares of this land belong to us, as Tacuaray. The National Institute of Rural Development and Lands has the file that says this: we want to clear up this situation and we want our lands back.
Clashes between protesters and police broke out in Chile, with police using tear gas. Hundreds rallied through the streets of Santiago to support the Valparaíso dock workers, who have been on strike since November. Workers are demanding a bonus and better working conditions. At the same time, protests in support of the Mapuche indigenous population also took place. They were joined by human rights activists, and they demanded justice over the killing of young Mapuche Camilo Catrillanca at the hands of the police. And on that same case, a video has emerged showing the last few seconds of life of Catrillanca before he was assassinated in Chile. The lawyer for the Mapuche, Patricio Sepúlveda, handed over the video evidence to the prosecutor in Temuco. The video also shows a policeman patrolling Coyipuyu Road while a helicopter is hovering over the area. The footage contradicts a statement made by the head of the police, who said evidence of police presence in the area that day had been destroyed. On December 19, Chile observes the National Day Against Femicide. Many women took part in cultural activities in memory of Javiera Neira Oportus, a 6-year-old girl murdered by her father 13 years ago. Our correspondent in Santiago, Tiare Valenzuela, has more.
To take out women from the Red Chronicle and put her in the feminist fight for resistance. This is what all feminist movements aspire to, especially the group called 19th of December that seeks called the National Day Against Femicide, a crime that in Chile is only classified when committed by a couple or spouse. But there are hate crimes against women directed at them for being women. And that is what they are fighting for, to have these crimes called femicides. Because there are a blacklist of many women who aren't visible in this list of official femicides in the country. A special day in which the leader of this group, Claudia Neira, lost her child, Javiera, murdered by her biological father on the 19th of December. A date also for the commemoration of women killed by hate crimes for just being women. Many of them have resisted, called police and called many other institutions, but haven't been heard, and many finally been killed, making longer the unfortunate list of gender crimes in our country.
Tere Valenzuela from Chile. And archaeologists in Peru have discovered an ancient human sacrifice site believed to have been created by the warrior civilization. The site dates back to between 600 and 1000 CE in the warrior zone. The discovery will prompt the rethinking of current theories about pre-Inca civilizations, particularly between the Mochica, Cajamarca, and warrior tribes. We're taking one last break, but stay with us.
The ruling world order has always subjugated the masses. But who are the actors behind every move? What are their real interests? We analyze every move on Critical Move. Weekdays, only on Telesur.
Welcome back. Russian President Vladimir Putin is holding an annual news conference to talk about the country's economic progress and future plans. He took questions from journalists on subjects ranging from the country's economic growth to its nuclear program and espionage accusations made against Russia. Talking about geopolitics, Putin said he largely agrees with U.S. President Donald Trump that the Islamic State has been defeated, but expressed doubts whether the U.S. would fully withdraw from Syria.
If we won't change the structure of the economy, we won't be able to achieve a GDP growth required for this breakthrough. The national projects are focused on it. Enormous resources will be invested. The government looks forward to changing structure and bringing forth innovation. Then growth will be increased, as other opportunities for development will appear.
Putin also dismissed the Sergei Skripal poisoning scandal, saying it was aimed at undermining the country's international standing.
This is a politicized and Russophobic approach, and it's just a reason to organize another attack on Russia. If there hadn't been the Skripals, they would have thought up something else. There is only one aim: to hold back Russia's development as a possible competitor. There are no other goals.
Newspapers in Madagascar are predicting a victory for Andry Rajoelina in Wednesday's presidential elections. With about 15% of the votes counted, Rajoelina is leading with 55% against Marc Ravalomanana with 44%. While polls closed on Wednesday evening, the count could be tense, as the first significant results are due by next week. The United Nations High Commission for Refugees is appealing for $2.7 billion to provide humanitarian assistance for the South Sudanese refugee crisis. The South Sudan refugee situation is believed to be the worst in Africa, as more than 2.5 million displaced refugees are struggling to survive. By the end of next year, the UNHCR estimates that just under 3 million people will have fled South Sudan. Around 1.9 million are eternally displaced due to the ongoing war. The Saudi-led coalition has broken the ceasefire in Yemen's Hodeidah port by striking the Al-Mansar village. 4 people were wounded, including a child. A truce between the two parties was reached last week in Sweden and was brokered by the United States. It was reported that although the ceasefire started on shaky grounds, it was holding up. However, the Saudi coalition has resumed their bombardment of the port. The mother of the 2-year-old child with a rare brain disease has finally arrived to the United States from Yemen, 17 months after she first applied for a visa. Shaima Suile is a Yemeni national and therefore was not allowed to enter the U.S. due to a ban targeting people from Muslim-majority countries. Her child, Abdullah Hassan, is not expected to survive, but the family has refused to remove him from life support until his mother sees him.
Mikey, where are you?
I want to thank CARE, Zat, Basim, and his crew member, the media, elected officials, and people all over the world for their support. This is a difficult time for our family, but we are blessed to be together. I ask you to respect our privacy as we go to be with our son again. The Muslims ban has hurt Yemen Americans' families and need to end. Thank you.
We now turn to other stories from around the world.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan has held talks with his Iranian counterpart, Hassan Rouhani, in Ankara. Rouhani arrived in the Turkish capital Ankara on Wednesday for a state visit. The war in Syria is expected to be high on the agenda after the abrupt decision by the United States to pull out of the country. The French government has announced that it will not withdraw its troops from Syria following the United States withdrawal. The country's European Affairs Minister told a local television station that the country will continue participating with the coalition that is fighting the so-called Islamic State. France has provided fighter jets and an unspecified number of special forces on the ground.
We had a terrorist attack in Strasbourg some days ago. My thoughts are with the victims and with their families. The fight against terrorism is not finished. There's been a lot of progress. It's true that we have had progress in Syria with the coalition, but this fight continues. We will continue to carry it out. But I think this makes us reflect once more on the necessity to have an autonomy in decision-making, a strategic autonomy in Europe, as we are directly threatened.
A report by the Committee to Project Journalists has revealed that a total of 53 journalists have been murdered in between January 1st and 14th of December this year. The annual report issued on Wednesday includes the killing of the Washington Post columnist Jamal Khashoggi, a Saudi national and fierce critic of the kingdom. The report also shows that the imprisonment of journalists is on the rise across the world.
And with that, we come to the end of this news brief. For this and other stories, you can find them on our website at telesurenglish.net. And we're on social media as well, so go ahead and follow us. For Telesur English, I'm Carla Gonzalez. Thank you for watching.
After the June